Hey guys, thanks for joining Learn to Play. My name is Lance, and today we're going to take a look at Legends of Draxia. This is a game that was put out by Mythica Gaming. It is a 2 to 6 player game that takes roughly a half an hour to an hour to play. It is a competitive game, so there will only be one winner at the end of the game. In the game itself, you're going to be gathering resources, building your buildings, fighting monsters, and casting spells. The goal of the game is to be the player that has the most victory points at the end, which will be totaled up once one of the players meets one of the end conditions. So let's head to the table and I'll teach you how to play. Alright, so now we're going to take a look at board setup. So Legends of Draxia can be played on any surface, or if you like, you can purchase one of their mats that they have that'll make everything nice and easy. At the beginning of the game, you're going to go ahead and shuffle all the decks except for the building deck, and place each deck out on its location. So we have the resource deck, the spell deck, and the monster deck. And then on the back of the building deck is the green dragon symbol. And so each building there'll be 6 of, and you go ahead and place those out in their spots. The one exception to that is the cathedrals, which have 10 building cards. Alright, so in Legends of Draxia, there are 7 different buildings you construct. Each building, at the top of each building card, has the building's name. Each building has a cost in resources that you can either generate by using resource cards that you have in your hands or other buildings that you may already have. Each building will produce a certain resource. The exception to this is the cathedral, which does not have a resource that it provides, but for every 2 cathedrals you build, you'll get to gain an extra resource card during your draw phase. And the cathedrals have the most victory points, which at the bottom of each card, each building will have victory points associated with it as well. So now for player setup, you have your 10 character cards you're going to go ahead and shuffle, and then choose one player. That player can select 3 character cards out of the selection. Once they make those 3 cards, they can go ahead and look at them. They'll choose one of those cards to play, and then the other 2 will go back into the hand and get shuffled back up, and this will continue for each player. When all players have their character card, then each player will be dealt 3 resources. Once that is completed, then we are ready to start the game. Alright, so now I'd like to take a look at the character cards. In the base set, there are 12 different characters that you have to choose from. And the top of each character card will have that character's name, and then each character has their own specific artwork. On the bottom of the card, it's going to list that character's additional victory points that you can gain by completing tasks for that character. Some of the characters will gain more for killing certain types of monsters. Some will get bonuses for having spells or using spells or holding spells, and others will get points for completing buildings or having certain buildings in their set. Alright, so there are 5 different resources that you'll have during the game. You have stone, food, and gold, and 2 weapons, the bow and the sword. You'll be able to use these resources to fight monsters, build buildings, and purchase spells. So you have 5 different types of spells. You have the Wish, Haste, Fireball, Monopool, and Fabricate. During your turn, you can use a spell at any time, and it'll give you the bonuses that are listed on that card. The only exception to this is the Monopool, which will give you victory points at the end of the game for every Monopool that you have in your hand. So when you get those, you just want to hold on to them, and those will give you victory points at the end. At the top of each monster card will list the type of monster that it is. On the side of the card, it's going to list the class the monster is, so we have Undead, Beast, and Humanoid. And then underneath that, if there's any special bonuses or deductions for the type of weapon that you're using against them. So for Undead, you cannot use bows, they count as 0. For Beasts, the bows count as 2. And for Humanoids, there are no penalties or bonuses. On the other side, you have the monster's hit points, so how many points of damage it needs to be dealt to kill it. Underneath the cards is the loot that you'll gain for defeating those monsters. And then finally the victory points for defeating them, which will be added at the end of the game. Alright, so now we're ready to take a look at a player's turn. So each player will take a turn in order, going clockwise, starting with the first player. So we're going to go ahead and say that this player over here is the first player. At the beginning of that player's turn, he's going to go ahead and draw 2 resource cards from the deck. After that, then during any point during his turn, he's allowed to spend 2 gold to purchase spells, 2 gold for each spell he wants to purchase. He can purchase multiple spells during his turn if he chooses. After that, he can choose to purchase 1 building from the buildings out there, or he can choose to fight 1 monster. Now there's only 2 exceptions to this. If he has spells that will let him build more buildings or fight more monsters, or sometimes when you fight a monster, the loot will allow you to fight additional monsters. So let's go ahead and take a look at his cards. Normally you'd keep these hidden from other players, but we're going to go ahead and play them face up so you can see what we have. So I have 2 food, a sword, gold, and a stone. So another option we have with resource cards is anytime during the turn we can choose to spend 2 resource cards of any type and create 1 resource card of another type. So say we wanted 2 gold to purchase a spell. I could take 2 food and turn them into 1 gold and use the 2 gold to purchase a spell. Or I could use a food and a stone to make a gold and then use the second gold as my 2 gold to purchase a spell. So let's go ahead and see about building a building. So let's go ahead and spend 1 food and 1 stone to purchase a quarry. So we'll discard those 2 resources and purchase the quarry. Now when you purchase a building, it comes in play tapped, so you cannot use it during this turn. But next turn, at the beginning of his turn, this card will refresh and we will have 1 stone resource that we can use to work with. Now, one other thing to keep in mind with buildings is that buildings cannot be used in the same way resource cards are, as far as that you cannot discard resources from buildings to create resources of another type. Building resources are exactly what they are and they cannot be changed. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at another example of this. So now we're done with player 1, we're going to go ahead and move over to player 2. So at the beginning of her turn, she's going to draw 2 cards as well. And again, we'll go ahead and play those face up so you guys can see them. So she has a gold, 2 swords, a bow, and food. So she's got a fair amount of weapons, so she's going to go ahead and take a shot at fighting a monster. So she flips over the top monster card, and it is a bear who's a beast, so bows will count as 2 points of damage. And he has 5 hit points. So she can spend her 1 bow to do 2 damage to him, and she has 2 swords to do 2 more, but she still needs 1 more damage, and she's out of weapons. So at this point she has the option, she can spend these 2 resource cards to make an additional sword or bow. So let's go ahead, since the bows do additional damage, let's go ahead and use these 2 resource cards to make an additional bow, and then we'll take back our sword into our hands so that we can keep that. So at this point then we would have 2 bows, 1 sword for a total of 5 points of damage. So we're going to kill this monster, and we get to draw 2 resource cards for loot. So she picks up another sword and gold, and then we put the monster over in a stack to our side, and we can play that face down so that other players can't keep track of how many monsters we've killed and how much they're worth. And at the end of the game, all those monsters will be calculated into her victory points. On top of that, with her special card, or special ability on her card, she gets 3 victory points for each beast she killed. So this bear is normally worth 5 points, but with her it's worth 8. So she really lucked out on that one. From there, her turn is over, and would move back to our first player's turn, where his card would be refreshed, any of his building cards would be, and then he would draw 2 additional resource cards. Alright, so there's a couple more things I'd like to go over with monsters. So the first one is, if you have a monster and you cannot defeat it, you would simply discard that monster to the monster discard pile, and you would hold on to any resources or weapons that you have. You do not have to discard those in order to attempt to beat the monster. If you don't have enough, then you hold on to them. The other thing with monsters is if some of the monsters will provide loot cards where they will allow you to draw additional monsters. You can choose to draw those monsters even if you don't have the resource cards to defeat them or resource cards in general. This is one way of depleting the monster deck, because each time a monster is discarded from the monster deck into the monster discard pile, it decreases the amount of monsters in the monster deck, and the monster discard pile is never reshuffled back into the monster deck. This is one of the end conditions for the game, which we're going to cover in just a minute. So play is going to continue going back and forth from player to player until one of two conditions are met. Either the entire monster deck has been gone through, or all the cathedrals have been purchased from the players. When one of these two conditions is met by that player or a player, then the end of game is signaled, and the other player will get one final turn to complete any other actions that they can and get any other victory points that they can before the game is ended. So when the game is over, then each player is going to total up the number of victory points they have, and just about everything in the game provides victory points, from the buildings to the player cards to monsters that they have, and even some spells. The only thing that will not provide victory points are resources that you have in your hand, so you can go ahead and discard any of those back to the resource deck. Once you have those totaled up, the player with the most victory points will be the winner of the game.